So I've been thinking a lot about modes because, like many people, I learned first that the modes are the same scale but starting from a different note. And I think this is a the wrong way to think about this. So you might think that the C major is C to C, and then the D Dorian is starting from D, the same notes. And the A minor is the same notes. But the fact that these are the same notes seems very incidental to me. Not, it doesn't actually point to the usefulness or the difference in between the modes. It's just almost a coincidence that A minor has the same notes as the C major. They're such different sounding scales. But how do you point at the difference? It would be much more useful to think about the difference between a C major and a C minor to point at the difference between the tone of the two. And I thought today that if you're at a dinner party and there's 8 people at the party, you're gonna have a very different experience if you're say it's a family sitting together, and you're gonna have a very different experience if you're sitting with your grandparents and your wife than you are if you're sitting with your cousin and your children. And the fact that it's the same people at the party is very incidental. Whereas if you have the same party but then you change out one guest, the one sitting next to you, for somebody new, then you might have a very different experience. You might have a very different flavor of dinner party altogether. Maybe this metaphor isn't that useful, but I think I learned about thinking about the modes in terms of brightness and darkness and how each mode can go from brighter to darker. And I think this is the most useful way to think about it. So a lot of us think of the major scale as the brightest, but it's not. There's one brighter. So the major is made up of, like, let's say we start on C, we go a whole step up, a whole step, a half step, a whole step, a whole step, a whole step, a half step. So that's your C major scale. And you can think of all the chords that are in there, making the 7 chords from the chords in the scale. But if you sharpen the 4th and you make the 4th note of the scale one brighter, you're going to get the C Lydian scale. And that means that when you go from, instead of going from the C to the 2 being the D minor, it's a D major. So that's the sound of the C Lydian scale, and it's so just bright and happy, and it's the happiest of all the scales, I think, of the modes. And you're going a whole step, another whole step, then a half, then a whole, then a whole, then a half. So that's your Lydian. Now, if we flatten that 4th, then we get the major scale. And now, if we flatten the 7th, which is the B in the C scale, you get the C mixolydian. And the Grateful Dead used to use this a lot. I don't know, I just think of the Grateful Dead when I think, if I start soloing. So I'm going C, and then of course the 7 becomes this, the B flat instead of this. So it's a little bit darker than the major scale, and 2 steps darker than the Lydian scale. Now, if we flatten the 3, the E there, the 3rd note of the scale, you're going to get our first minor. And we're going to just have these 2 flats, and that's called the Dorian. So we've got your C, your D, your E flat, your F, your G, your A, Now, you might notice that these are the same notes as the G minor scale, but that's a totally different thing. If you're in G and you're playing a minor scale, that sounds completely different than playing these very same notes over the C minor. So there you have your Dorian, which has the flattened 7, the flattened 3. And this is used a lot in jazz. I'm just doing a C minor 7, and then I'm improvising now. If we flatten the 6, we're going to get our minor scale. That's C minor. It's just one of the modes. It's not, we shouldn't privilege it over, we think, you know, at the beginning you may only know major and minor, but they're only 2 of the modes. Ionian and Aeolian, I think. Now, what happens if we flatten the 2, the second note? Then we get the Phrygian, which is what I used to play a lot because I played flamenco guitar for many years. Now, these happen to be the same notes as F minor, but again, incidental compared to the idea of now we have a major scale, but with a flattened 7, a flattened 6, a flattened 3, and a flattened 2. You can hear the flamenco there. Now the darkest of all is if you take your 5, and the 5th is so important in the kind of creating that nice chord of the 1 and the 5, and if you flatten that, you get this really dissonant. So if you get rid of the 5th altogether and you flatten that, you get the Locrian, which is hardly used because the 5 is so important. So if we go 1 and then flatten 2, flatten 3, flatten 5. So we've got the 4, 1, flatten 2, flatten 3, 4, flat 5, flat 6, flat 7, and back to the root. So there we've gone from the Lydian, the major, that's flattening that 4, and then we're going to flatten the 7 and get the Mixolydian, and then we're going to flatten the 3 and get the Dorian, and then we're going to flatten the 6 and get the minor, and then we're going to flatten the 2 and get the Phrygian, and then we're going to flatten the 5 and get the Locrian. Now, what's so interesting is that the Locrian is so dissonant when C is the root. But those very same notes, if you start on the C sharp, is our C sharp major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait, I'm missing one note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I just confused myself somehow. Of course, the C. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. And these, we have the notes of a C sharp major scale. And now if we go through those and we sharpen the 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we sharpen that, we'll have the C sharp Lydian. And then we can flatten that 4 and get the C sharp major. And we can go through that whole process again and learn all the modes of C sharp. And then do the same thing for D. Start with the major, sharpen the 4 and get the Lydian, flatten the 4, get the major, flatten the 7, get the Mixolydian, flatten the 3 and get the Dorian, flatten the 6 and get the minor, flatten the 2 and get the Phrygian, flatten the 5 and get the Locrian. And you should just learn all those scales through every single one of the 12 notes. That's my tip for today.